Stargazers, and welcome back to Doctor Who Literature, the new podcast taking you through the world of the Target novelizations in publication order. My name is Jason, and I'm your host on this journey, this very long journey. Today we begin our 2-week look at the February 1976 novelizations. Today, we're examining Doctor Who and the 10th Planet by Gerry Davis, and next week we'll be examining Doctor Who and the Dinosaur Invasion by Malcolm Hulke. But first, some news. A rumor briefly broke earlier this week that the 14th Doctor had been cast, and he was Hugh Grant. The rumor, of course, was broken by an unreliable source. It spread across the internet like wildfire without any effort at verification, and Hugh Grant himself stepped forward to say, nah. So we can put that one to bed, I hope. In happier news, I received my copy of the newest Doctor Who, Dr. Who offering by Obverse Books. They've been doing a long-running series of Target-style books for charity based on the Peter Cushing Doctor. They began with novelizations of the two movies, and they have moved on to a lot of apocryphal material, including movies that never got made. Escape to Danger is an anthology, Target-sized, so not very big. I think the book is 189 pages total, of 6 short story novelizations of Peter Cushing radio plays from a parallel universe where Peter Cushing and the rest of the movie cast did adaptations of main universe Doctor Who stories in their own style. The first short story in the book is an adaptation of The Wheel in Space, but the book takes the conceit to a whole new level with apocryphal interviews with actual Doctor Who personnel who worked on the Peter Cushing radio play in this universe, and it's got cast list for all the episodes that are quote-unquote novelized in the book. It's really remarkable writing. It's complex, it's clever, it's funny. And yes, it's just the one joke that the Peter Cushing Doctor is real, and that he has this pocket universe where he's done story after story after story. But it's a good joke, and I enjoy reading it. Coming up next, my friend Ross Aiken from Gallifrey's Most Wanted. We're going to talk about Doctor Who and the 10th Planet. Let's get to it. And I'm joined now by a returning guest, Ross from Gallifrey's Most Wanted, one of my favorite podcasts. Ross, welcome back to the show, and thanks for rejoining me.
I'm glad to be here. I don't think I'm going to be as loving about this book as I was the last one.
Oh my goodness!
No, I'm not. I won't be vicious, but I was like, I didn't remember in Curse of Peladon. I didn't remember reading that one because I read all these in the early '80s when I was a freshman in college. And this,
So I had you on for Curse of Peladon in episode 11, and that was a book that you enjoyed a little more than I did. I had issues a little bit with the prose style and what I thought were some of the overwritten sentences, although you had a very good rebuttal of that.
Well, I listened to someone read it, and it worked better than because I was kind of doing both. I watched it for a little for reference, and then I read it, and then I listened to it be read because that's a luxury of 2022. I remembered this one though because this was my first regeneration book. By this time I may have seen Peter Baker into Davison for the first time around the same time.
Right, my first was Peter Davison into Colin Baker. That was about 6 weeks into my 6 or 8 weeks into my fandom, and it was a huge moment for me. But this was my first, I think, regeneration book. I bought this book at my first convention, July 27th, 1985 in Manhattan. It was they had all the books on the table, and some of the books were the older ones that you wouldn't see on the bookstore shelf. So I got this, I got the Three Doctors, I got the Keys of Marinus, I got the War Games.
War Games is a good book. I like the War Games.
That's a controversial book because it cuts so much out of the televised scripts. For my money, the War Games is better in book form because it gets rid of a lot of the obvious padding and it puts in a lot more sharp material that wasn't on television. But that's a conversation for another day.
Well, ask me back because I've got opinions on that. Because when I saw War Games, it was as 2 3 hour movies. Because we got the omnibus where I grew up. Because that's kind of what's fun about going back and reevaluating these books. Because some of them, I definitely had not seen any black and white. Not much, if I'd seen any. And it'd been an episode or two before, because we did not get these until after. We didn't get these stories where I grew up, my brother was taping them for me because I was in college.
The day I
Until
saw my
after.
the day I saw my first black and white story was the day I bought this book. At the same convention, I saw the movie format version of Dalek Invasion of Earth, which at that point was 20 years old and is now much, much older. Of course, going back 20 years now takes you to, HD color movies. But in 1985, going back 20 years, you're watching a grainy, unrestored kinescope of Dalek Invasion of Earth. It was quite a different experience.
Oh God, it was a kinescope. I think 1985. I was working at a Comic Con in DC, and I worked for a company called Jeppy's Comic World. He's the guy that owns the distributing company Diamond, who distributes used to distribute all the comic books in the world. And we all had to do a turn at a con, and they showed, I think, an episode of the Quarks, the Crotons.
The Crotons.
Yeah. And it was a terrible copy, and we watched it, and then we went, this is straining my eyes. So we went to the bar, and we ended up getting drunk with Jimmy Doohan.
That seems a lot more fun than watching the Crotons.
It was, because every time I watch it, I think about getting drunk with Jimmy Doohan. But
That's quite a free association.
It was. That's fandom in like the early days before these things were readily available in this country. You had to see it at a con, and you wouldn't see all of it. You'd only be allowed to see 1 or 2 episodes.
10th Planet, of course, none of us saw for a long time because even though episodes 1 and 2 and 3 survived, there was no commercial release until the late 90s.
Yeah, and that's when the VHS with a dodgy reconstruction.
I had an nth generation copy. I was visiting John Blum, the author, who was down in Maryland at the time before he got published in the Doctor Who series, and he had an nth generation copy of 10th Planet. And I'm like, I must borrow this. I promise you'll get it back. So he loaned it to me, and I got it back to him, eventually. And it was a grainy copy, nth generation, bad audio quality. And the Cybermen voices are recorded such that if you're hearing it as an nth generation bad audio copy, you're going to miss 80% of what they say.
I know. Every time me and Vic talk about it, it sounds like Kenneth Williams, the comedian, the camp British comedian of "We will kill you." It's Rip Torn, man. Not Rip Taylor. I hear Rip Taylor's voice every time I hear that guy's voice. That's all I could hear, and he's throwing confetti. Our English listeners, you'd be grateful that you don't know who Rip Taylor is.
I was thinking more Charles Nelson Riley for our
a little
friends
bit
here in America.
I'm a huge Charles Nelson Riley fan. He did a one-man show called Life of Riley, and it's on YouTube. It is worth watching because it's his life story. And he went to the actor studio. His class was Steve McQueen, Hal Holbrook, bunch of people, and he lists Geraldine Page, William Hickey. And he does the whole thing where he reads, "This is my 11 o'clock acting class, and I will tell you about this class. None of them could act for shit."
William Hickey had a remarkable voice for an actor.
Yeah, he had one of those voices where I'm going to play 3 parts, but I'm going to play it in every show. You got it. Yeah, I mean, that's a good thing. And that the voices aren't better now. Now that I've seen it restored and and it's a nice restoration on the DVD with the animation, and the animation works. Those early animated work, but yeah, I didn't see it in its entirety until I bought the VHS.
Watching the Nth Generation copies in 1995, if that's the year that it was, I was very disappointed in the 10th Planet because I had gotten the book 10 years earlier, and I had read it the same day that I watched my first Hartnell story. And I just loved the book, and I read it over and over and over again until I started to get bored because I was able to, recite the lines along with the text. The episode couldn't possibly match up to the build-up that I'd been giving it over the last 10 years.
Yeah, you were giving it better special effects.
Plus a poor audio copy, and there was better acting in my head than some of the second and tertiary roles on TV. We'll talk about that momentarily. But it wasn't until the restored version came out in the late 90s, and then finally the DVD, which I believe came out in 2013.
Yeah, it was late. Was it near the end?
It was one of the last ones. Yeah, it was.
Okay, because the animation, it was when they started to, they didn't really want to put them out on VHS unless a DVD until they had something and hope that they found it. And I think, me and Vic we've covered a couple with animation. Power of the Dalek, that was our second episode, and we used the animation, the BBC America animation. But we just did Reign of Terror. So some of them are good. Some of them, me and Jeff talked about animation. Some of it's good. Some of it's bad. My only thing with these, when they did the animation, is did it fit? Was it appropriate to that story? You could do, because they're varying companies, varying styles. So
I am a unpopular traditionalist when it comes to animation because they have the camera scripts, they have the studio floor plans. If they wanted to, they could reproduce the exact way the 10th Planet would have looked on television because they know the camera angles, they know the sets, they have the dimensions. What they're giving us is artistic. They're doing a lot more cuts. They're doing a lot more flashy visuals that would not have been achievable in studio in 1966.
Yeah, but they don't do that in all of them.
I want to see what it would have looked like in 1963, 66, 68. I want as truthful and as faithful a representation as you can get. And that might sell 7 copies as opposed to what they're doing now, which makes a little more of a concession for the
when they're doing
viewer.
The whole ones, I think you have to go away. One, for Macroterra, they don't have enough telesnaps to really know what they're doing.
Right.
And Fury of the Deep, they don't. Well, the Fury of the Deep, they have not those, because when I get those, I get the steel box and I watch them in color because it's going to be pretty. They're beautifully done. And the 3D modeling of the backgrounds are so good that helps with the less built up character stuff, because they only have a year. And an animated feature takes 6-7 years to do.
Yes.
Yeah. So that I like, but I do when I've done the color, I've done the black and white and the special features, I watch the telesnaps. And for Evil of Daleks, which I think is the best one they've done so far completely. That's really close because they have. Loose Cannon has done I think they went to Loose Cannon and went, what are the camera shots? Let's get as close to it as we can. Where in Macroterra, I don't mind a little license because it's not that great a story. Make it at least visually interesting. How bad are those? I mean, I can't imagine. All we have of that is a few little clips, and it looks like the dodgiest monster they ever made. And I'm gonna put Warriors of the Deep Panto Horse. Okay, what is it? The Merca?
The Merca.
Yeah, okay. There's some dodgy. Creature of the Pit bad. And I like Creature of the Pit.
Yeah, I heard you and Jeff talking on the Runcible Report episode on season 17. I think that was both your favorite of the season.
Neither of us knew that was good because we don't really discuss. The latest one I had for season 2, I had to write it down because it's so many damn stories. It was 9 stories. It's like, I'm not doing this on the fly. But we were laughing because we were both like, Christ, we both picked this piece of, we knew it's not the best story, but it's the most entertaining. Because me and him, we're curmudgeons when it comes to City of Death. We're like, If I wanted it's Douglas Adams, I'd listen to Hitchhikers.
the best thing about City of Death is that it's not Douglas Adams. It's also Graham Williams, and it's Michael Hayes, and it's Tom Baker ad-libs. I think City of Death is magical, but I also love Creature from the Pit, and I used to dislike it because I just bought into the fandom received wisdom about the prop being bad and Tom Baker being out of control. But Creature from the Pit is tremendously witty. The scene where Tom Baker and Lalla Ward are communicating only by using the word yes is one of the best written scenes in the
I
classic
think he's
series.
not out of control in that. I think he's very precise. His humor it's not, I think because he's got people to play against.
His chemistry with Myra Francis is terrific.
And who's the actor that's in the pit? The guy that could see the future, and he's just a con man. Really,
Jeffrey Belden.
Yeah, they're stunning together because they both know I'm not going to try to out funny you. I can't. So I'm going to be, and we have the same sense of humor. So I find them very good together. And I think, there's some issues with the metal thieves, but they're funny. And it's a great cast. It's a really, really good cast. And
in Received Wisdom, all anybody remembers is Tom Baker doing salacious things to the Arado prop. But when you think about who he's acting against, the scenes with Myra Francis and Jeffrey Belden, like you say, it's a much better performance than people remember. So the Received Wisdom is totally wrong on that one.
Well, it's like I had to talk about the gunfighters on All Time in Space, and I hated it, and I bought into the Perceived Wisdom, and I got the dodgy American accents is annoying, and I joke about it. But I watched it this time, and I watched the technical aspect of it, and I went, "Wow, they did a lot of work on this."
2 or 3 episodes ago on this show, Joe Ford and I did a commemoration for Linda Barron, who passed away recently, and we both love the Gunfighters to pieces, and we were, singing snippets of The Last Chance Saloon. So the Gunfighters is another story where I have overcome conventional received wisdom, and I love everything about the Gunfighters, and I think it's not so bad it's good. It's so good it's good. That's my take on
it's
the
good.
Gunfighters.
What I like about the late Spooner on is the comedic historicals, and it's a comedy up until the last episode's dark as hell, and there's a lynching in it.
But that's Hartnell's strength. Hartnell's strength is the comedy. You give him funny actors, and he is at his best.
Oh yeah. And if you give him good, me and Jeff, when we talked season 2, if you give him a good partner like he has with Maureen O'Brien. That's, once she comes on, he doesn't really team up with Barbara and Ian.
Right. Now, I haven't heard your take on season 2 yet, but my opinion, having gone through the entire pilgrimage in the last 18 months, is when you give Hartnell nothing, when you give him the web planet where he's reciting technical dialogue against a hairdryer, and if you give him...
I love the web planet.
And if you give him the arc where he's acting against an empty chair, he's much better in the historical comedies where you have big name actors giving him something to play off of.
Yeah, I think he acts better in the lighter ones, and I think he's better with Peter Purvis and Vicky.
Oh, that's a great combination. Yeah.
No, because it's a lighter touch. I love him with Ian and Barbara, but because they would always put Susan with one of them, and then him. But once Maureen O'Brien's in it, they really, to lighten him, they make them a double act, especially after the Romans. If I'm producing him after the Romans, I'm like telling my writers, put them together. He is relaxed. He is at ease. He loves her to death. Just give them scenes together. He'll be more palatable to us and definitely to the audience. Because he's an actor, actors have to be wrangled, and that's not a bad thing. He's the star. You have to give him things that make his job easier. He's carrying this crap.
When Donald Tosh came in and started spreading all these horrible stories about Hartnell, that's when it really started to go south. But for me, the Time Meddler was one of his peak performances because you have him against Vicky.
It's my favorite story of that season. It is my absolute favorite. I can watch it whenever and be entertained. Are there better stories in that season? Yes. But they're great together. It is. But we're to talk about 10th Planet. You and me, I will drag someone on a tangent.
I want to go back to Creature from the Pit one last time, though, because my current bio in my Facebook profile is from Creature from the Pit. The future foretold, the past explained, the present apologized for. One of my favorite lines of Doctor Who dialogue ever. But yeah, let's circle back around and talk about the 10th Planet. Which copy of the book do you have?
I have the 1982 edition, and it's got the nice. Can you see? You can see this.
Yes, I've got the 1984 edition of the same. I heard you mention earlier that you were not going to be as fond of the 10th Planet as you were of Curse of Peladon. And I'll be honest, I'm writing my script for the second half of this episode, which is me working my way through the 10th Planet, the prose style. I think Gerry Davis is one of the best novelization writers. He's certainly one of the most unsung. When you talk about the best,
I find him a bit dry.
Well, we'll come back to that in a moment. When you talk about the best Target writers, everyone mentions Terrence Dicks, Malcolm Hulks, Ian Marter, Chris Bidmead, Ben Aronovich. Gerry Davis doesn't always come up as one of the best. I think he is, and I'm going to give you the floor in a moment. I am very fond of this, and when I was going through my notes that I took the last time I read the book, probably in 2013, it's just a loving. I took a lot of notes, and it took a long time to write my script for the first 4 chapters of the book because there was so much that I loved and enjoyed, both in terms of prose and writing style and dramatic choices and alterations from the TV episode. In a few moments, our listeners are going to be able to hear me talk about why I love the novelization of the 10th Planet, but I suspect you have a different take. So why don't you tell us why you didn't like this book as much as I did?
I found it a little dry. I found it a little stilted. It gets better toward the end in some of the action sequences, the later chapters. It's a quick read. There's something about him trying not, because he knows that no one's seen this. You know what I mean? So I feel like he's making corrections, and I don't think the corrections really catch. I'd forgotten that he changes the time period. He says it's the year 2000.
That was a relic, I believe, from the original script, because it was the year 2000 in the original script, and then they revised it to 1986.
To 1986, yeah.
Which is the year the Mets won the World Series the last time. So 1986 is a very big year for me.
I remember I was in a fraternity with a lot of New Yorkers. And I remember that. New Yorkers are Boston fans, and I'm like, hell, I don't care. I'm an A's fan.
He struck him out. The Mets have won the World Series, and they're jamming and crowding all over Jesse Orasco. The dream has come true. The Mets have won the World Series, coming from behind to win the.
See, I did a big riff on the 1984 Mets during my episode for the Three Doctors, so it's only fitting I do a riff on the 1986 Mets here, or at least give them a shout out. So what Davis is doing is novelizing the original scripts, and that's why William Hartnell is in the Part 3 material, because in real life he called in sick that week, and they had to give his lines to Ben and Barkley, but in the book...
Yeah, because he was not well.
No, but in the book you get what would have been William Hartnell's lines, not reassigned. So it's not so much correcting as Davis transcribing the rehearsal scripts, which later had to get changed. But at the same time, he does put in stuff to make it contemporary. So he puts in the whole scene where Ben is screening the man with the golden gun, which obviously was not a thing in 1966.
Yeah. I did like that touch, and it was very, it wasn't just generic. It was a specific film, and I just watched it a couple months ago. Oh, okay, yeah. It is good.
And it was the most recent Bond movie at the time the book was written, so it certainly would have been fresh in America, or fresh in the minds of the readers.
Yeah. I did, it was, and I listened to, because I went back and I listened, and Annika Wills reads it, and it's good, and she does her best. Maybe it's, there's some stuff in it that just is a little outdated, and this time what took me out of it too is when they use the word Negro, and they don't change it for the audio, which was made 20 years later. They don't take it out, or just not,
It was radical to have Earl Williams even on camera in the first place. If you read the DVD production notes, Williams was scripted as a generic Welsh actor, and it was never the plan to make him an Afro-Caribbean astronaut. When they hire Earl Williams, I think he becomes the first black actor to play an astronaut ever in recorded history.
Yeah.
If I remember that correctly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I like him bringing it out that the character is black in that, but just the term was archaic then.
Archaic.
It was archaic.
He uses a couple of different words that we would never use today in a million billion years.
Yeah, in the book, I see it. No one checked it. They really didn't care enough to go and check. They went, no one will notice. It's going to kids. But if I had seen that, my father had seen something like that. What the even then he would have been like, "What the hell is that?" That I just don't know. I don't remember this one as fondly, and so rereading it, I was like, okay, this one's like, it's not hitting all the boxes I need to be hit to enjoy it as a book. I mean, but for the first, more than 10 years, it was my 10th planet. I just think it's not struck me as good as I thought it was. Maybe. Does that make sense? I remember it more fondly.
So when you picked it up this time, you thought it was going to be great. And when you read it this time, you were a little disappointed.
Yeah, that's kind of it. It just, and I really love Curse of Peladon so much. And those are the only two I've read in probably 20 years. I've got a handful of the new ones they put out, but I haven't read them. I just got them to put them in my collection.
I got all the new ones this past summer, and I bogged down about halfway through Pirate Planet because can I confess to you, Ross, I am so tired of Douglas Adams pastiches. All Doctor Who's been doing in print for the last 10 years is imitating Douglas Adams. I just can't anymore. I want to see other different styles of writing. Douglas Adams was great, but he's not the only author who ever lived. So you can give us something else that is not a Douglas Adams pastiche once in a while, and we'll still be there. We'll survive. You're not going to kill us by not giving us Douglas Adams all the time.
Yeah, I've not been very interested in some of those books that I have because it's like you're just trying to copy something. And, it's just let Big Finish do it. They're better. They're better at it. I don't mind when they're doing one set in his time period that they do it in his style.
Not everything needs to be absurdist comedy where the writer is winking at the audience. You could tell a straight story and get away with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, my favorite Douglas Adams Who is Pirate Planet. Because it's to me, it's the funniest. His Who is not some of my favorite. I mean, he's good. I mean, I like it, but it's not something that ticked the box for me or made, it's not what I wanted to see. And that later Baker is rough I'm better with it now, but it used to be rough with it. Anything after Hinchcliffe and Holmes, I didn't want to watch it. But, I thought Tom was out of control, and now I'm mellowing. And it's like, he's just having fun. It's fun.
When I was watching The Pilgrimage last year, when you hit the transition from season 14 to season 15, Hinchcliffe, I think, did 16 stories, and 8 of Hinchcliffe's 16 are in the top 20 in the last DWM survey from 2014.
Really?
Then you get to season 15, which starts with Horror of Fang Rock, which is one of my top 10, so that's great.
It's a masterpiece. It's a perfect story. No fat.
But then you go to Invisible Enemy, which you can see the wheels falling off. It's a bad director.
That frickin' prawn, man.
Image of the Fendal is not, in my mind, as good as everyone thinks it is. And Underworld...
It is one of my favorites, but I like the cottage horror British fiction. And it could be a Quatermass. It could be a John Wyndham novel. I like that type of story.
I don't think Image of the Fendal is a good representation of that genre, but again, we're sort of getting off track. I'm just saying that when you're watching the show in order, there is a huge dip in quality from seasons 14 to 15, and then, of course, we haven't even talked about Underworld, but Graham Williams makes a comeback, and Key to Time has some masterpiece episodes. Season 17 has some masterpiece episodes, so there's a slight dip in quality when Williams takes over, but for the most part, it's not a tremendous dip. There's a few bad episodes, and then it comes back to being great again. And then season 18, I love to pieces. So season 18 ends on a triumphant exit.
I think season 18. I'm going to steal Jeff's word for it. It's mathemagical.
Mathemagical, yes.
It is, and I think Christopher Bidmead, you can tell the quality of the John Nathan Turner era by when he has a script editor he trusts to do his job without supervision, or who knows how to convince John of a better choice. Where Eric Sayward and him never gel, and it's a little spotty.
When I was at Galley last month, and you would have been in the room had you been able to come, Steve Gallagher was there, and he did, sitting around a conference table with 10 fans, telling stories from his time on the show and his later career. And even though all this happened 40 years ago, Steve Gallagher still has terrific recall, and he was talking about the difference between being script edited by Bidmead, who changed his script a lot, but kept the heart of the story and made it as good as possible, versus being script edited by Eric Sayward, who turned his script into Terminus, the TV production. So Bidmead was a terrific number 2 for John Nathan Turner and did incredible work with those scripts. And then Eric Sayward comes in.
It's a solid season. I don't think there's a bad one in it. I think they're terrible ones in season 17. And some of them are ones I like. All right. I don't mind it. There's a kitsch factor to it. And, sometimes they leaned into it in the later years with Tom. It's like, this script's half written. Just let him loose. For how long? 5 minutes. You just let him loose for 5 minutes. Why? The script is terrible. He's going to have to do some lifting.
So coming back to 10th Planet for a moment or two, there are changes in the book, but the changes are things that are being reverted back to from the original scripts before rehearsal, like 1986 becoming the year 2000, and like Schultz, the astronaut, who was Australian on TV, being German-American in the book, which was the original scripted brief before they changed it. What I like about that, I think Davis's prose style is very good. He has good vocabulary, and he knows how to write an action sequence. So when the Cybermen finally arrive at the end of episode 1, chapter 4, it is very violent. I'll have some quotes from that later on in the broadcast.
Yeah, that I did like that, and she read it I was listening to that on the bus to work this morning, and it was like I'd read it the night before, and I was listening to it on the bus, and it was like they were a little better, and it was like going. I don't remember that being that action packed. I remember being that little bursts of action, as much as you couldn't do in the studio. It was a lot more of posing and shooting somebody, and somebody, the cutaway, and then someone's smoking or whatever.
Right, and I think that Davis is very good at writing the mind's eye. If you think about this and Moonbase and Tomb of the Cybermen, each of the stories is bigger than the budget would call for. You can't do Antarctica at Ealing. You can't recreate the moon at Ealing. And you can't do an Egyptian-style dark pyramid at either Ealing or Lime Grove D, which is where they were making Tomb of the Cybermen.
I remember really loving both of those books. Because I was pretty much I was more a Cyberman guy, right, in my early fandom.
Davis is the guy who gave you the Cybermen, so he's certainly the man to write.
I mean, they are. I mean, the Moonbase, when you watch it, even with like the reconstructions, it's it and Wheel in Space, man. It's the same plot. But I did enjoy the books before I saw those, or saw the episodes, because I didn't see any of Moonbase until it was on it was on the Troughton years, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Episodes 2 and 4 of the Moonbase.
I mean, I might have to go and read those, because I did enjoy those. I remember enjoying them, and I remember reading this one and being excited that I was going to read the first Regeneration. Because I'd never seen. I learned my history reading Doctor Who Weekly.
Tomb of the Cybermen is not coming up on this show for another 4 or 5 months, because going in publication order, this is book 19 or 20, and Tomb of the Cybermen is book 41.
Wow.
So it takes a while for Tomb of the Cybermen to come back around. And you'll find that the way that he writes the tombs in the novelization is what we should have had but couldn't get on TV because low budget, Lime Grove D, not enough space. when the episodes were discovered in 1992 and fandom gave out a disappointed groan, it was because they were expecting what they saw in the book, the mind's eye
Yeah.
from the book. And I had that same reaction with 10th Planet when I first saw those nth generation copies in 1995. I'm like, this is not as good as the book. Of course, I've come
No.
around to that because now I can appreciate the visual limitations and I can appreciate it on its own terms and not be disappointed by the low budget. But it took a
Yeah.
while for me to get to the point where I can love Tomb of the Cybermen and love 10th Planet as episodes, even though they're cheap.
There's something about the black and white era that is, I'm it's weird to be nostalgic for something that was already nostalgia when you first experienced it. Because I've not watched the only new Who I've really watched in the last year or so, or something I've talked about on a show, or the new stuff coming out. Because it's just in the during the year being stuck in house or at work only for that period, I just was finding comfort in old Who. I did a big rewatch. Jeff convinced me to give season 17 and 18 a try. And 18, and then I went, I'll just continue. And I watched all of Davison and all. I took a break because I got through Trial of the Time Lord, and then it came out on Blu-ray, and I had to watch it twice in like 4 months.
My
So
condolences.
yeah, well, I like the Blu-rays because it's like this. Jeff says they're documenting the show for us. They're giving us the special features. All the old special features are there, and the new ones are just phenomenal. What they're getting out.
Yeah, they're filling in the documentaries that they didn't get to make for the regular DVDs with Chris Chapman, who's a terrific director and producer.
Oh my God, the interviews with Matthew Sweet.
Those are intense.
He asks, it's not a gotcha question. It's just a question that none of us would have thought of. And the person is so grateful that it's been asked that they go on for 20 minutes.
And you also have the behind the sofas, which are a great way of watching the story through the eyes of people who were there, or even more interesting, when somebody from across eras, like when they had Sacha Dhawan and Anjali Mohindra watch
that was
season
freaking amazing.
Or when you have Peter Purvis commenting on a black and white story, on a color story, or when you have Wendy Padbury watching, season 26. I love the observations they make as somebody who was in a different era of the show. Or Colin Baker watching Paradise Tower saying, I wish this was one of my stories.
Oh, God, I love that.
That's
what
wonderful.
I liked was when they had Mark Strickson on, and it was him, Matthew Waterhouse, and someone else. And I think Strickson had a couple cocktails and was sobering up in the first story. I was like, I think he's been drinking. But no, they're fun. I love it. Before I watch the documentary, when I get to the extra feature, I go straight to Behind the Sofa.
Right.
I'm looking forward to 2 weeks where season 17 is released in this country.
I just got my notification from Amazon. My season 17 should be arriving first week of April, so that'll be a nice project for me. Mark Strickson has become the de facto host of a lot of those Davison-era documentaries.
Well, he's a documentary. He made a living making documentaries. He knows how to do it, and he's good at it.
He discovered the Crocodile Hunter. He can do whatever he wants.
Did he discover the Oh my God!
He discovered Steve Irwin. I heard him speak at Galley in 2020, the month before the pandemic. And you put Mark Strickson on a panel. Doesn't need a moderator. Just talks to the audience for an hour. He was telling and reenacting stories from his documentary days, being chased by deadly creatures through the Australian outback. He is a tremendous, tremendous speaker, and he's a lot of fun.
I'd like to see that because I remember when I used to go to Regen in Baltimore, and I've seen Sylvester McCoy at every con I've gone to. Seems, and him and Davros, Terry Malloy.
Terry Malloy, he's another convention fixture.
Those two, they did one, and all they did was walk up and down the aisles and talk to people and do shtick, and it was amazing. It was like, okay, I'm entertained. I've heard all these stories. I've got every I've read every magazine. It's just I know all the anecdotes. I don't really care. I want to hear something new. I want a new take.
Yeah, that's why it was great seeing some of the actors that you don't often get to see showing up again. So getting to hear stories from Stephen Gallagher, getting to hear from Sadie Miller and Chris Naylor, who were the new Sarah and Harry.
Ah, God, I could wish it had a good big Finnish group. I was really looking forward to that. And India Fisher was there, and I was looking forward to the Big Finish stuff.
Yeah, Conrad was supposed to be there, but he ended up not being able to go because of the COVID. I was looking forward to seeing him.
Yeah, I had reached out to him if I went to say hi, to get it, but maybe in a year or two. I can't go this year coming up, I don't think so. I will get out there eventually.
I'm going to have Conrad on this show in a couple of months, because if he's not going to make it to Galley, I'm going to bring him to me. So
cool. I love it when he's on a podcast. He's so good at it.
He's terrific, and he's also great on Big Finish too, of course.
Yes, me and Vic should be getting to him soon, because we're using Eighth Doctor audios.
So let's come back to 10th Planet for another moment. We've talked about the pros, we've talked about the Cybermen, we've talked about the changes from the original, or we've talked about the changes between the TV production and the scripts that Davis is novelizing. So we've talked about the James Bond bit. Let's talk a little bit about the end of the book. So you have, obviously, the regeneration was scripted. Hartnell had some lines that he was supposed to deliver about, not wanting to give in. For whatever reason, those lines never got recorded. And they ended up getting repurposed for Twice Upon a Time, was it 51 years later?
Yeah.
In the novelization, Davis restructures that pretty heavily, and he doesn't bring back the lines that Hartnell was supposed to say and ended up getting scratched. But what he does do is change the nature of the regeneration. And he has the new Doctor, Patrick Troughton, giving some lines that were not on television. Why don't you walk us through that a little bit?
It took me a second to figure out that it was different. And then that last line, "I'm the new Doctor." And then I went back and was like, oh, I have to reread this because something's different here. Some of it I caught and some of it I didn't. What I caught more toward this is that the reference to the regeneration, the foreshadowing of the regeneration in the prose was heavier than I had thought. Like he leaned into it, which he should. Because that's better storytelling. In the show, he's just sick.
Davis leans into the fact that the character is degenerating, getting frail, getting forgetful, getting aimless. And he puts it right there on page 1, which a lot of the other regeneration novelizations didn't do, with the exception of Logopolis, where it's mentioned on the first page almost that something terrible is about to happen.
Yeah, I'm going back to the part where he doesn't fall to the ground in this, does he?
So what happens is it happens off screen, and to be fair,
they walk into the room after it's happened.
This is from the original script, because what happened is they got to the studio and they had this broken vision mixer, which they couldn't use because it would do like ghosting and solarizing of the image. And then they realized that broken vision mixer, which was never to be used under any circumstance, was the perfect way to transition a dissolve from Hartnell on camera 1 to Troughton on camera 2, because it gave you that ghostly special effect that you otherwise could never realize in studio pre-CGI in 1966. So the fact that we have an on-camera in-vision regeneration is a happy accident from broken technology. I think in the novelization, it's the way it was originally scripted before they discovered the faulty vision mixer. Page 139. Suddenly, a long wailing cry came from the control room. The voice was not the Doctor's. They rushed out. They hurried over to a long, couch-like arrangement with a folding metal cover over it. The use of it had never been fully explained to them. The Doctor had simply told them that it compressed sleep, which, by the way, gives me flashbacks now to Mark Gatiss' Sleep No More, but that's a rant for another day. The cry seemed to be coming from this apparatus. And then when they open it up, the Doctor is covered in a cloak. So you have an actor under a cloak and a cloak under a metal sheet. And when you pull everything back, there's a new Doctor under there. Of late, the Doctor's hands had become white and transparent, the blue veins showing through the skin, the hands of a very old man. This is page 140. But Ben was pointing in amazement at two completely different ones. They were shorter, thicker set, reddish, the hands of a much younger man. So Ben and Polly walk in, and the regeneration has already happened, and they pull the covers back, and there's Patrick Troughton's younger hands and then they pull the cover back even more, and there's his face. It's not done in vision, and it's not done on camera.
That would have been weird. And if you're not going to play it, well, they do in the next story kind of go, is he really, Ben going, is he really the Doctor?
And that was written because in the original 10th Planet script, they didn't see it happen. So you have this 7-minute sequence where they don't believe their eyes. That works a little less well because they've seen it happen in vision in 10th Planet as televised.
Yeah,
so,
that makes sense.
Right.
You know.
This is how it was supposed to be. And it would have been a cheat, especially if you're looking at it 60 years later. How did the first regeneration happen? Oh, he put a cover over his head, and when he took the cover off, he was a different actor.
And now they just kind of use this motif again and again, you know. They fall on the floor, they glow, they change.
When they remounted bits of 10th Planet for Twice Upon a Time, when they had David Bradley and the two young actors playing Ben and Polly, they actually show Hartnell's hands getting that golden glow, the modern day regeneration.
I kind of like that episode. I know it bugs people, but to me it was just fun Doctor Who and I didn't care.
I don't like the way it wrote the first Doctor, but I love David Bradley in it. So I like the episode a little more than it objectively deserves, I think.
Yeah, I just think it's a lose-lose situation for both of them. I think the sexist line about Polly and that is just, yes, that bugged me. That took me out. But him doing as much, him trying to just be the Hartnell Doctor as best as he could, and, you know, Moffat giving him some stinker lines, but.
So we're coming to the end of the hour. What I want to do with you, Ross, is play a game of 20 questions.
Oh, good God. Okay.
So this is the third time I'm doing it on the show. I have used randomizer.net to pick a random Doctor Who adventure from the entire run of the show, 1963 to 2022.
Oh, shit.
Using 20 questions, as in the popular kids game, you are going to guess which story it is. Graham Burke was able to get it in 8 when Cy-Hart was on. Last time he was able to get it in 13. Nobody has failed yet, and I hope you are not the first to fail.
Fuck. Oh, my God. All right. I'm older than all of them. It's not fair. All right. Is the title a planet name?
No.
Is it in black and white?
No, it is not. That's 2 questions. Question 3.
Did the producer wear Hawaiian shirts?
Ooh, that's the best question that I've heard so far. No, the producer did not wear Hawaiian shirts.
Did the Doctor wear a scarf?
No, the Doctor did not wear a scarf.
Was he a blonde posh guy?
No, he was not. Question 6.
I'm probably using a bad strategy with this one. Did he carry an umbrella?
No. Question 7.
Did he like ruffled shirts?
No. Question 8.
All right. So I'm assuming he had an affinity for cats?
No, he did not have an affinity for cats. Question 9.
Oh, crap. I'm not thinking modern here. All right. Did he wear a bow tie?
No, he did not wear a bow tie.
I'm terrible at this. This is going to be awful.
Question 10.
Did he travel with a school teacher?
No, he did not travel with a school teacher. Question 11.
Oh, fuck. Did he hang out with people in a housing estate?
Yes, this is a doctor who did hang out with people in a housing estate.
Right.
Question 12.
Were there ghosts in this story?
No. Question 13.
Were the Daleks in this story?
No. Question 14. You're getting very close. I can see where your train of thought is going. You're going to get this.
Was there a wedding involved?
No. Question 15.
Was it set in World War II?
Yes.
Can I ask a technical question?
Go ahead.
Is it if it's a two-parter, is it a specific part of the two-parter?
No, it's the two parters are treated as one story.
Okay. Does he dance?
Yes, he does.
Is it the Doctor dances?
Are you my mummy?
Are you
You
my
are
mummy?
not, but yes, it is Empty Child, the Doctor dances.
Okay.
All right,
Oh,
17 questions. You made it under the wire.
whew. Well, that's a lot of who. I just got bogged down in trying to figure out which doctor it was. If I had figured out it was him, it's not that hard because they're only they're only 8 stories. Yeah, well, that's why I went. I got to cut out a chunk. Okay, let's see if I can exclude Nathan Turner.
That excludes a lot of story. That's 10 years right out of the canon, right there. If you ask that question,
Yeah.
that's a good. But you and Simon were taking the scenic route, so the Hawaiian shirt question is a great question. I like that.
Well, it's just to get it. It was like planet names. I don't, and I also don't really. I used to have that here, all that crap in here. It's not in there anymore.
I am noticing as I approach age 50, and after 2 years of working at home, being home 23 hours a day, my memory is not what it used to be.
No, I'll be 58 next birthday, and it's just like, thank God for the program guide and all my reference books. I use them when I'm going back, and that's why when I do these books, I also have got to kind of like spot check the episode. I got to remember, how does this compare?
So let me ask you a couple of wrap-up questions on 10th Planet. Is this the definitive First Doctor novelization?
No, I really do like the first one, the Dalek. I really do like that book.
Oh, that one's hard to beat. That's David Whittaker in full-on myth-making mode.
Yeah, and if you listen to me and Jeff, Whittaker is the Dalek writer for us. Because I like Nation's early Dalek stories. I really do. But I really do like David Whittaker's take on them. I really, really do. I think Evil of the Daleks works so much. But now that I have a moving version of it, like, I don't, his don't feel padded. Does that make sense?
I hate the review that goes, this classic series story is 2 episodes too long. I don't think that's true. The only story where I think that's true is Evil of the Daleks, because you had to structure it in such a way that Patrick Troughton was not in episode 4.
Because it was his vacation, right? He was in Mallorca.
You had to do a story arc in episodes 3 and 5 explaining his absence and why he only appears in insets. And there's just too much time spent in the Maxtable house. And when you take that exact same plot a year later and make it as The Wheel in Space, which is David Whittaker trying to do for the Cybermen what he did for the Daleks, I think it winds up being terrible.
Oh, I don't like his dad. The more I go back and watch like Wheel in Space, I really think it's a dog.
Evil of the Daleks has a great first 2 episodes. It has a great last episode and a half. I think there's too much time spent in the Maxtable house. Again, it's the only story that I think is 2 episodes too long. Otherwise,
see, my thing with these is you watch them 2 episodes a night, right?
Correct.
Yeah. See, I'll keep saying this for a while, is until Flux, I'd never seen Doctor Who as a serialized weekly episode story where you had to wait, and it's amazing. So a modern fan looking at old Who, we never really get to capture the serialized taste. Did it work watching it with not knowing what was coming? You have to have no foreknowledge. How do these single episodes ones really work in real time? So, and I grew up with them edited together in movie format. So this one and a lot of these long ones, like that messes it up because it's not naturally paced correctly. Like if you're doing a feature, you're going to have different cuts.
Right. And you didn't have previously on Doctor Who in 1966, so you have to incorporate a recap of the previous episode into the new one.
And sometimes they do it and sometimes they don't.
If you're watching it in movie format, you have the same conversation 3 times in 30 minutes. That would never happen in a modern day program.
Oh my God.
But you're watching 3 episodes strung together, so it's the same conversation in episodes 1, 2, and 3.
I don't remember which one it is, but there is a Troughton one where the final 3 minutes of one episode and the first 3 minutes of the next episode is the same scene shot completely differently. and they're back to back in the edit when they cut them together. Because the person who did the cut didn't realize it.
Oh, wow.
It's freaking jarring. It's like, it might be War Games.
So next question about this book, is this the definitive Cyberman novelization?
Nah, oof. I'd have to be honest, I remember loving the moon base.
The moon base was my first, and the moon base is set on my 97th birthday, so I hope to make it to 97 and to celebrate the events of the moon base as they took place in the novelization.
Yeah, I like that story. I do like the moon base story. It's not a great one once I saw it, even with reconstructions and an animation, that it's kind of, it doesn't need, just, it didn't live up to the novel.
And that, I think, is a tribute to Gerry Davis, because his novelizations, especially the first three Cybermen he did, 10th Planet, The Moon Base, and Tomb of the Cybermen, his novelizations are epic.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go back and reread those, because those were ones I really remembered liking.
Lastly, you are now, I think, on 3 podcasts. Tell us what's coming up in the future for each of your 3 shows.
All right. Gallifrey Most Wanted. This weekend, you will hear me and Vic talking about Brain of Morbius. We had to do some shuffling of schedules because stuff going on. So we put out 2 Runcibles in a row, and we're going to do 2 Galleys in a row. And then the week after that, we will be doing Modern Undead, which we love. We both love parts of it, but there's a lot of corridor walking. So, but that, and then me and Jeff, we're trying to figure out, we haven't picked our next topic. He's been doing a binge into Big Finish, and he's actually been turned on to the spinoff stuff. He had avoided the modern era spinoff stuff. He never got River, and he never really got Modern Unit, and he's listened to them, and he's like, okay, now I get it.
Right.
And so, yeah, because they get to do stuff. I mean, River gets to do stuff in some of her stories. In other stories, she's just there to, keep a plot line moving along.
Right.
But he now gets the unit, and I played catch up because I took a break. I was delving into other podcasts and stuff, and I'm catching up to him. I've just done 2 of the audiobooks, and I love them. We may talk about that. And on my comic book podcast, I've had to take a couple break on the float. I do a new podcast called Stop, Let's Team Up. It's about superhero teams. Every Saturday, I do something about a super team, whether it be about a creator, the lineup, a story, an issue that means something to me. And then every Wednesday, I am reading the Legion of Superheroes comics in chronological order from 1958. And if I live long enough, I get to now.
Wow.
It's a lot. I am on episode 10 or 11, and I haven't done a story that was actually a Legion of Superheroes story. It wasn't a Superboy, Supergirl story with them appearing. I haven't even got to the very first. This story is written to be a Legion story. And I'm still not in, I won't get out of the 60s for about 3 or 4 years.
About 3 or 4 weeks ago in my pilgrimage, I watched Fires of Pompeii. Okay? And that I realized, I love the Pompeii story. When did I first discover Pompeii? So I thought about it for a moment. And I realized my first exposure to Pompeii was reading a Superman comic when I was a kid. So I went to the list and I found it. Superman 343 has a cover date of January 1980, which means it was released 3 months earlier.
Yeah, because the cover date is the date you took it off the rack.
Right. But it was released to the stores, and I realized it brought back a memory that I'd long since forgotten, because this is decades ago. This was my present from my parents for my 6th birthday. I was bought 1 Superman comic and 2 Batman comics. And I had actually repurchased those Batman comics at New York Comic Con in 19 before the pandemic. And I was able to find online a scan of Superman 343, which starts in Pompeii in the year 79. And the villain, who's a sorcerer, is able to preserve himself against the coming catastrophe and is uncovered during excavations in 1979 and has a vision of Superman and believes Superman is a menace trying to destroy the world. So he fights Superman thinking that he's trying to save planet Earth. And that was my very first exposure to Pompeii, was this comic that I got on my 6th birthday, when, of course, half the vocabulary would have been over my head. Looking at it back now, 20 years later, because it's only been about 20 years since 1979, it was Denny O'Neil who wrote it. Kurt Swan illustrated it.
Yeah, Kurt Swan's my Superman artist. He will always be my Superman artist.
So between Denny O'Neil and Kurt Swan, you have amazing graphics, you have amazing dialogue, you have rich text boxes. This was a great exposure. So for me, I've now been going through and reading the next Supermans after that, 344, 45, 46. It's a little more comedic than the Superman I remember when I started reading again in the mid-'80s, but that was my very first Superman, and that's the reason why I love Pompeii, that very first Superman comic from 1979. So that was an interesting stroll. And that's not a superhero team-up story, but that is my recent foray into comics, similar to what you're doing.
Oh, I've actually covered one of my Avengers 105 as one of my episodes as one of the first comics I ever remember reading. And I did, and the first Legion, I got a copy of the first appearance of the Legion in a 10-cent box in the late 70s at a little comic shop. And I didn't realize for 10 or 15 years what it was. Wow. That it was the first appearance of Legion of Superheroes. It didn't have a cover. My brother looked at it and went, "What the is this?" And I went, "I got it from the comic shop when I was like 12. He went, "You know what this is?" I went, "It's a reprint." He goes, "It's not a reprint, you idiot. It is Adventure 247, you moron. You've had this for how long?" I went, 25 years. "You have it in hardbacks." I just thought it was a reprint, some crappy reprint without a cover. He goes, "You next read the copyright box, idiot." It's like, so I still have it. I've sold most of my comics, but I have both of those comics. That's great. And I bought a couple when I was a kid in the 70s. We got 100-page giants, and he would hand them to me. They would have like a Justice League. Would have a Justice League, Justice Society, an Aquaman, and the Vigilante, the cowboy on the motorcycle from the 40s. You get all that in one comic book. So I'm enjoying doing the comic series. Check it out, folks. Even if you don't like comics, it's just basically me telling you why it's so good. It's just I'm by myself most of the time. I do have guests. I've had a comic historian. I call her that. She did a biography of the very first comic book super team creator, Gardner Fox, probably one of the most important comic book writers in the history of the medium. And she came back and we talked about why representation matters. Because comics going through a transformative era of expanding its representation, and it's pissing old codgers like me, not like me, but old codgers my age off, and I really don't care. I'm poke the bear.
The people who are making a fool of themselves during this week's Supreme Court confirmation hearings, for example.
Oh, how bad was it today?
I'm waiting for the news stories to trickle to my phone because I was at work today and I didn't watch, and I feel like I wouldn't have liked it, but I'm sure there's going to be some all-time bad quotes.
You would have liked Durbin because he brought up in his opening thing before the question was all the crap that Hawkeye was going to ask her.
Ugh. Hawley the
and he said, "Why don't you talk to me about child pornography cases and what your thing is? Because you're being accused of being soft on crime, which is not true. So why don't you?" So he took the ammo right out of the bastard's gun. And she says it's terrible and I have to listen to it, but you all set laws on how we sentence people. I do math, I do assessments, and I follow the guidelines created by Congress. And everybody I put away went away for a substantial amount of time. Like 29 years. You're saying you're soft. You're sending people to prison for 29 years of where they have to report everything they do. So she's holding up. She's fine. She's fine.
I'm looking forward to seeing the highlights of that. I'm looking forward to the next 20 or 25 or 30 years of her jurisprudence because we're in a pretty bad way right now with some of these decisions coming out. Ross, thank you very much for joining us. It was great talking about comics and Big Finish and the 10th Planet and our various takes on different eras from the show. And so your shows are Gallifrey's Most Wanted, The Runcible Report,
and Stop, Let's Team Up.
And where can we find you on Twitter?
Gallifrey's Most Wanted is at Gallifrey's MW Pod. Runcibles at Runcible Report. And Stop Let's Team is at JSA4E. That's JSA, the number 4E. Originally, it was going to be a Justice Society of America podcast. And I said, I don't want to just do one team. I may go back and do one. But so.
All right. Thanks for joining us and have a great night.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Doctor Who and the 10th Planet, written by Gerry Davis. Televised as the 10th Planet. Teleplay by Gerry Davis, from an idea by Kit Pedler. Screen credit to several misspelled variants on Kit Pedler and Gerry Davis. Televised October 1966. Published February 1976. The sergeant blinked again. 3 lights were moving towards him through the murk of the blizzard. Even as he looked, the lights changed into 3 tall, straight figures, clad in silver-armored suits, advancing across the ice with a slow, deliberate step. Horror-struck, the sergeant reached for his gun, and a stream of bullets sprayed out across the marching figures. But they continued marching. The Cybermen have arrived. The first invasion of Earth by this invincible, fearless race, and the last thrilling adventure of the first Doctor Who. The book opens with the by now familiar Gerry Davis prologue describing the creation of the Cybermen, except like with the novelizations of the first 2 Cybermen stories being published in reverse order, it creates a slight continuity problem, as the Cybermen here are said to have come from Telos first, not Mondas. Telos will be a story for another day. What's fascinating to me about the 10th Planet novelization is, when I bought the book on July 27th, 1985, it already seemed old, a lost story, starring an actor who died a decade earlier. But the book itself was only 9 years old when I bought it. By way of reference, my kid has to read Hunger Games as part of a unit on dystopian literature this year at school. Hunger Games is already way older in 2022 than 10th Planet was to me in 1985. And Philip Seymour Hoffman's also been dead for nearly a decade. Man, I'm old. Davis, surprisingly, leans into the passage of time between the TV story and the book's release. In October 1966, man had not yet walked on the moon, and the UN was not sending teams of international astronauts into space. But by February 1976, a dozen Americans had already walked on the moon, Skylab was in orbit, and we'd sent space probes deep into the solar system. And Davis acknowledges to the reader what's changed. The scene is a familiar enough one to TV watchers, but the attentive viewer would have noticed that the tracking station's ceiling was a little lower than that of Houston or Cape Kennedy, and that more of the technicians wore uniforms. What he never would have guessed, looking around at the flushed, sweating men, in their singlets and open-necked shirts, was that immediately above the ceiling lay 6 feet of ice, and above that, the blizzard-swept wastes of the snowy Antarctic. The tracking station, codenamed Snowcap, was situated almost exactly over the South Pole. That paragraph does 2 things. Well, 3 things, assuming that all TV viewers are male. First, it acknowledges that people of Earth are more familiar with space travel in 1976 than they were in 66, and it proves that, boy, Davis can set a scene. Davis also does clever work right there in Chapter 1 on how important General Cutler is, because Cutler's mental deterioration is going to drive the story heavily. The General, we're told, liked his little jokes to be appreciated. The 2 doomed astronauts, Schultz and Williams, were scripted as German and Welsh, on TV played by Australian and Afro-Caribbean actors. In the book, interestingly, Williams is kept as Earl Cameron, who played him on TV, and is called Tall and Handsome, as well as a few other times called by archaic words referring to his skin tone. But Schultz reverts back to German, or German-American. Davis also tells us, as Tom Baker's doctor was fond of saying, what could possibly go wrong? A pleasant, run-of-the-mill mission. For a moment, the veteran astronaut thought back to the tougher flights of the past, when spaceflight still entailed unpredictable hazards. The good old days. Perhaps it was all becoming a little too easy. This is the first full William Hartnell novelization commissioned by Target, not counting the three 1960s Frederick Muller reprints, or the brief Hartnell cameo in the Three Doctors novelization. But Ben and Polly, we've met before, in Doctor Who and the Cybermen, also written by Davis. Davis, right there on page 1, foreshadows what's to come for our poor Doctor. The Doctor seemed to be aging rapidly. He was beginning to stoop a little, and his absent-mindedness had increased, to the point where he did not seem to recognize his two companions, frequently addressing them as Ian and Barbara, the names of his first two fellow space travelers. Later on, by nature a kind man, the Doctor had grown irritable and dictatorial of late, which almost seems like a run at Hartnell himself. Davis also adds several missing trips in between the end of the previous story, the smugglers, which appeared to lead directly into 10th Planet on TV, and gives the Doctor a physical deterioration, which wasn't really evident in Hartnell's performance in episodes 1 and 2. The 10th Planet dates back to that thankfully lost era, when comedy was derived from funny accents. There's plenty of those on TV in 10th Planet. John Brandon's American Sergeant, one off-screen character in Geneva who's said in Chapter 3 to have a foreign accent, whatever that means in a multinational base, and the base guard named Tito. Tito on TV was seen to read Sergeant Fury, but in the book is reading Captain Marvel, who wonderfully is engaged in a life-and-death struggle with a marauding party of robots, end quote. The two characters' accents, the Sergeant and Tito, are retained for the book, and the men also, quote-unquote, whistled when they caught sight of Polly's long, slender legs. Polly, who later in Chapter 2 is also described as tall and shapely, in case you missed the point, feels a little more human, and a little less like a polar bear after removing her furs. Some bits of comedy are missing. Robert Beatty's insult about Hartnell's hair, and John Brandon's shouted insult to Hartnell about, let's just play the clip.
Move it, come on, hurry it up, come on, let's go, come on, Pop, will you move it, Pop, let's go, come on.
Please, Doctor.
Just a moment, Pop, now who are you, and what are you doing here?
Oh, we just landed outside.
What in?
Well, it's a sort of spaceship, actually.
Some spaceship.
You can knock off the jokes.
She's not joking.
Look, buddy, I want the truth and quick.
Can you tell us precisely where we are, please?
You're at the South Pole base of International Space Command, and frankly, Pop...
Doctor,
your story's gonna have to be awful good.
So you mean we are on Earth?
well, you were at the South Pole.
Oh, boy, Tito, get the CO.
He's not gonna like it.
Get him!
Why don't you speak up? I'm Jeff.
I've probably mentioned this on a couple of episodes before, but I spent years thinking that John Brandon was putting on the worst Brooklyn accent in the history of ever, but it turns out it is authentic. And he spent 1 week in the UK making Doctor Who and spent the rest of his career playing cops and other authority figures on a long run of American TV programs, including Beverly Hills 90210. It's in Chapter 2 that we learn the story takes place in the year 2000. Not 1986 as on TV, which creates a discontinuity with the previous novelization of the Moon Base, which set the story in 1986. That's an error by Davis in transcribing the TV scripts, which were originally set in 2000 before revisions. Interestingly, when Mondas arrives in Chapter 4, Polly in the book, presumably via the original script, recognizes South America, whereas on TV, Annika Wills said Malaysia. And hey, here's a thought, all right? If Mondas has the same land masses and the same shape as those on Earth, do they also have the same regional accents? The cockles of my heart warm over at the idea of Brooklyn-accented Cybermen, like John Brandon's Brooklyn-accented Sergeant, coming from the Mondasian equivalent of Long Island or the Five Boroughs. Chapter 2 ends with the first hints of trouble for the astronauts Schultz and Williams. I love these scenes on TV. Two actors tucked into a corner of the TV studio, one of them wearing Bosk's future outfit from Empire Strikes Back, and one of my favorite Kenner Star Wars action figures growing up. They're acting their hearts out and pretending to react to intense gravitational forces while sitting in chairs. Davis matches the intensity of their TV feats with excellent prose and characterization, throwing minor profanities into this material in the book for emphasis. In Chapter 3, Davis writes that their faces were wet with sweat, their breath labored. almost to the limits of their endurance. That's breathless prose. Now, Davis may have taken a run at Bill Hartnell's reported irascibility earlier. In Chapter 3, he gives us the first great description of the First Doctor in a Target book, surpassing Terrence's brief glimpse in The Three Doctors. Quote, Ben was suddenly aware that the Doctor was indulging in another favorite habit. His head was tilted back. His eagle eyes were staring at the television screen. His right hand was nervously stroking his cheek. It meant only one thing. The Doctor had an idea. In Chapter 4, Davis writes in Hartnell's unscripted TV mannerisms. He nods, grasps the lapels of his cloak, and looks, quote, a little like a schoolteacher addressing a class. Davis also twice uses the word radiophonic in Chapter 4, as he did in Doctor Who and the Cybermen, as Pete Lambert and I talked about back in Episode 12. Again, leading me to wonder, is that a BBC in-joke? Or was it standard for all sci-fi writers in the 60s and 70s to use the word radiophonic as an adjective? The end of Chapter 4 is the Episode 1 cliffhanger. That's one of Doctor Who's seminal moments. The arrival of the Cybermen at Ealing, to the tunes of Space Adventure, a snippet of which I played earlier in this episode. Davis does not spare on describing the moment, the violence. Quote, the robot had swung the heavy bar effortlessly through the air and had brought it crashing down on the soldier's head, smashing helmet and skull like an eggshell. The man lay motionless in death. A red stain began to taint the snow. The first use of the word Cybermen in this chapter is given its own single-sentence paragraph, although the word robot, of course, is not strictly accurate, so don't at me. The Cybermen are Davis and Pedler's biggest contribution to Doctor Who, still seen almost annually on our TV screens, even up to the present Flux series, but you cannot get much more epic than this chapter here. In Chapter 5, Davis inserts a possible cameo. An announcer, familiar to millions of American homes, end quote, is watched by Secretary Wigner on TV, explaining the arrival of Planet Mondas. I'm sure that Davis had someone specific in mind when he wrote this scene, sitting there in the mid-70s. Of course, we could say now it's probably Trinity Wells, but my guess would be Walter Cronkite. Davis makes some interesting changes to the first appearance of the Cybermen as they invade Snowcap in Episode 5, or check that, Chapter 5, the Episode 2 material. The full reveal of their face is not until this chapter. On TV, of course, we had a Cyberman looking right into the camera at that cliffhanger. We read here of flat, expressionless masks and reflected glints of light on their menacing silver helmets. And they speak in a flat, inexpressive monotone or a flat, electronic voice, to use two different descriptions given in Chapter 5, not the voice that Ross imitated for you earlier. This isn't quite the original Mondasian human-faced Cyberman that you saw on television, but the Cyberman murder of a base soldier is quite vivid as written. Quote, the soldier's shot rang out across the room. It was followed almost immediately by a red flash and a short, hard noise like a football rattle from the Cyberman's weapon. The soldier froze in his tracks. The carbine dropped from his hands, and he fell back against the console. Smoke spiraled upwards from the openings of his uniform. Later in the same chapter, the Cyberman electrocution of General Cutler is described as a long, vivid blue arc that causes the general to scream in pain, his head to jerk back, and him to crumple to the floor. Much more effective than the corresponding scenes it's produced on TV. As brutal as the Cybermen are, Polly makes a great showing. Davis, as he did earlier in the novelization of the Moonbase, has great fondness for the character. And wait another decade or so for the novelization of the Highlanders, also by Davis. I think that's the next time he writes for her after this. And he writes her gloriously. Here he says, alone of all the people in the room, she seemed completely unafraid of the three tall visitors from space. Although a page or so later, General Cutler, who's said to be almost as tall as the cyber leader, stared hard at the blank circular eye holes, as if trying to probe through to the mind within. Oh, and in Chapter 8, it's Polly who delivers a famous line, not impishly, as Hartnell does on television. Let's play another clip.
There's no scientific certainty that this is a dying planet. Perhaps we prefer to take our chances here.
You must come and live with us.
But we cannot live with you. You're different. You've got no feelings.
Feelings? I do not understand that word.
Emotions, love, pride, hate, fear. Have you no emotions, sir?
Come to Mondas and you will have no need of emotions. You will become like us.
Like you?
We have freedom from disease, protection against heat and cold, true mastery. Do you prefer to die in misery?
But look, surely it's possible for us not to lose all its energy.
It is inevitable.
Then you don't mind if we all die.
Why should we mind?
Why? Why?
Because millions and millions of people are going to suffer and die horribly.
We shall not be affected.
Don't you think of anything except yourselves?
We are equipped to survive. We are only interested in survival. Anything else is of no importance. Your deaths will not affect us.
But I can't make you understand. You're condemning us all to die. Have you no heart?
No, that is one of the weaknesses that we have removed.
The deaths of Williams and Schultz in Chapter 7 is something I find tremendously moving, even the first time I read this book when I was 11 years old. I'm in awe of Derek Martinus's direction of the sequence on TV. See what I said to Ross earlier about not fully appreciating this material when I watched that Nth Generation copy back in 1995. But again, it's amazing what he did with two actors sitting in a corner of the studio. The book takes us into their physical sensations. Every movement now caused them acute pain. Both felt weak and exhausted. And their off-screen deaths are poetic and poignant. There was a sudden rise in the intensity of the light from the telescope screen, as though an invisible hand had turned up the brilliance control. The interior of the capsule cabin whitened. Polly and the others had to shield their eyes from the bright glare of the screen. Then it slowly faded away until the television monitor went blank. Polly took her hands from her eyes and looked around uncomprehendingly. Dyson's head was bowed at the console. Barkley was holding on to the side of the desk as though near to collapse. One of the radar technicians leaned over and flicked a switch, cutting off the almost unbearable scream of static from the loudspeakers. Note what Davis does here. He doesn't just focus on the deaths. He focuses on the human, very human reactions to the deaths, as opposed to the Cybermen's impassive indifference to human suffering. A lighter tone in Chapter 7, The Battle for the Projection Room, is Ben watching Roger Moore as James Bond, and calling him Commander, a gorgeous character touch for the sailor. And with Bond fighting a gang of black-clad karate students, this is almost certainly Man with the Golden Gun, as Ross and I mentioned earlier, the most current Bond film at the time Gerry Davis wrote this book. On TV in Episode 2, Ben is watching a Western. I can't quite identify which one, but I'm sure the answer to that is given on the DVDs. Ben gets to show rare emotion when fighting the Cybermen. Too late to be scared now, he says to himself. Davis also extends the fight beyond what we saw on television. The light abruptly went out on the Cyberman's helmet, and smoke started curling from his neck and from the armor-like cracks between his arm and shoulder units. As Ben watched, horrified, the giant's body stiffened and crashed backwards to the floor. Later, there was no sign of life. The Cyberman's plastic chest unit had melted, as though from a terrible heat. A wisp of smoke was still rising from the blackened edges of a jagged circular hole. General Cutler has an extra line in Chapter 8, defending his actions to Polly as he tries to prevent his son from dying in orbit of the Cyberman energy drain. On TV, he reminds Polly of his own personal stake in the crisis, and she says, "I'm sorry," and that's it. In the book, though, he replies, "That's okay. Don't apologize. Just remember." That's a really good line. In fact, going through the book, I'm fascinated to see that Cutler is much more sympathetic than I remembered. But in Chapter 9, Cutler, when speaking to his son on video link up from space, gave no other visible sign that its owner was more than just another astronaut on a routine mission. On TV, Beatty murmurs, "Hello, son," during this scene, but that line is not in the book. And since the book follows the original script, not the televised version, I'm assuming that "hello" line was a Beatty ad-lib devised during the rehearsal week. Davis And Chapter 10 also gives Cutler a long reflection on the nature of his command, his monthly tour of inspection to the base's nuclear reactor, and his observation that all a general needs to know is the location of the fire button, or it was his job to make the decisions, Davis tells us, and up to the scientific eggheads to understand the technology that made it all possible. Chapter 9 also features an unfortunate Davis line that must have eluded an editor. Check this out. There's an illuminated wall map in Secretary Wigner's office, and Davis writes, glowing red dots dotted about the world. Say what now? I mean, of course dots are dotted. They're dots. That's what dots do. There's another change. Wigner's RT operator in the book is a man, but that role was cast as female on TV. Thank you again, Derek Martinus. The more significant Chapter 9 change has to do with what Ross and I discussed earlier. William Hartnell isn't on TV for Episode 3. He called out sick that week. His lines were reassigned, mostly to Ben and Barkley. Since Davis is novelizing the scripts, in which Hartnell still featured, all those lines revert back. And Davis takes the opportunity to, as Ross and I also discussed earlier, to lean into the First Doctor. Sorry, for force of habit, he's not really the First Doctor anymore. The First Doctor's looming death and regeneration. Quote, Polly turned to the Doctor. During the preceding activity, he had been slumped in a chair by one of the consoles, his eyes looking down at the desk, his face giving no indication of his thoughts. What could be the matter with him? Polly grasped his arm. Are you all right, Doctor? The Doctor nodded. Yes, child. And then, into Chapter 10, the Doctor seemed to have aged, even in the few minutes that they had been locked in the cabin. He falls asleep on a lower bunk bed. Was it Ben's imagination? Davis writes. Or had the Doctor's hair gone a shade whiter and finer during the last few hours? His skin, which looked as transparent as old parchment, was stretched tightly over his prominent cheekbones. That's an effect that would have been virtually impossible to achieve in a recorded live-to-tape studio environment with few recording breaks, even if Bill Hartnell had not been off that week. This goes to what I said earlier about Davis writing for the mind's eye, the cinematic version of the scripts, always looking for a visual cue for the mind to latch onto. A literal visual, like Man with the Golden Gun, or a metaphorical visual, like the post-Douglas Camfield and post-Joe Martin, William Hartnell Doctor, aging to death before our eyes. Along the same lines, Davis in Chapter 10 gives us a long description of the multi-level silo room housing the visible Z-bomb, or as my fellow Americans say, Z-bomb, which is far more lavish than the TV visuals. Speaking of which, Davis writes the polar landscape as visually and as tantalizingly as he wrote for the moon in Doctor Who and the Cybermen. Quote, the moon had come out, and a strange, unearthly silence dominated the crackling, cold landscape. The moonlight added a silver sheen to the Antarctic plains, giving them a dreamlike, shimmering appearance. This is contrasted with the, quote, long, ugly, torpedo-like shape of the Cybermen spacecraft. This is what I meant when I said earlier about Davis's prose style for me being right up there with Terrence Dick's. Well-placed adjectives, no run-on sentences, and vivid imagery. So subtle and skillful that you might not even realize how brilliant is his technical craft. The Cybermen later march across the snow in an implacable and terrible manner. In fact, by using the words strange and terrible in that material, Davis really is writing just like Uncle Terry, who loved those two adjectives for his whole career. There's actual gunfire towards the Episode 3 climax. As Cutler finds Ben messing with the Z-bomb controls, he actually fires a gun, not on TV, and Davis tracks the course of the bullet as it strikes a metal panel and ricochets away. And boy, does Davis ride a tense cliffhanger as the countdown to the Z-bomb launch enters its last 30 seconds in Chapter 11. Quote, the whole tracking room was electric with tension, and the Z-bomb, which was capable of splitting the Earth in half, had long been held as the so-called ultimate deterrent. Nobody, least of all the men manning the base, had thought that this terrible weapon, the most destructive invented by mankind, would ever be used. Now, the unthinkable was happening. In a few seconds, the hatches at the top of the silo would open outwards in the snow to reveal the cannon-like mouth and long, deadly rocket. Destination Mondas. The Doctor returns to the TV studio in Episode 4. In the book, of course, he never left. But he does transform in a different sense, as Davis resolves the cliffhanger. Quote, "Now he rose to his feet, and Ben and Polly watched in amazement as the mask of age and extreme fatigue fell away. The failure of the Z-bomb had galvanized him. He seemed to have recovered his former strength and resilience. 'It seems, sir,' he said to Cutler in his mannered, slightly old-fashioned English, 'that your plan has been foiled. The rocket has not gone off. Though, if I may confess to you, I do prefer Hartnell's more simple delivery on TV.'"
The rocket hasn't gone off. It didn't work. Now we've all got a chance of life.
Your Cybermen friends may have a chance of life, but not you, Cyber. Nor that old man. Now go get him up here.
But he's ill.
He's gonna get worse. Get him up!
No need. Let him here.
Doctor, you all right?
Yes. Your plan is foiled, sir. You cannot fire the rocket.
Davis does embellish the wearing a bit thin line here, foreshadowing the end by having the Doctor say it's nearly time for a change, but that he's all right for the time being. But soon, the base crew seem to recognize that the Doctor is their new spokesman, as he speaks with authority, and with, of course, his head tilted back. Contrasted with the Doctor's changing is Davis finally breaking faith with General Cutler, and in the moments before his death describing his face as, quote, "twisted, frightening, almost demented." But Davis also adds a beat to Davis's death at the hands of the Cybermen, I should say Cutler's death at the hands of the Cybermen, suggesting a general so obstinate that he momentarily defies death. The characters aren't sure at first if he's been hit, and it takes a moment for the, quote, "telltale wisp of smoke" to creep from the collar of his tunic as he dies. Another change to the Cybermen that Davis adds, and remember this came out about a year after Season 12's Revenge of the Cybermen on TV, so maybe he was embellishing the past with a touch of the present, is that the Cyber Leader in Episode 4 gets to wear a black helmet in the book. One thing Davis does, similar to Terrence, is use the companions as viewpoint characters, explaining the story through their eyes. As Polly is imprisoned by the Cybermen on their ship at the Episode 4 material, a hostage to ensure the base's good behavior, Davis tells us how much the cold chills her body, but that she has the strength to confront the Cybermen, even while strapped to a chair, in, quote, what Ben would have called her best Duchess voice. Honestly, though, this becomes Hartnell's book. I think this has a claim to being the definitive Bill. It's his fifth book, really the fourth if you count Three Doctors. He was the antagonist for most of Doctor Who, in an exciting adventure with the Daleks, and really only a secondary character in the Zarbi and the Crusaders. I think he comes off very well in the Crusaders when he's there, but here, when he, quote, raised his sharp eagle profile and looked down at the Cyber Leader, as if pitting his will and intelligence against that of the Man of Steel, there's the print equivalent of a stand-up-and-cheer moment. Davis introduces some new characters in the book, not named on TV. There's Rogers, the base's senior engineer, who pops up on page 126 for a couple of lines that were not on TV. The red shirt who dies in the radiation room in Episode 4 is given a name in the book, Haynes. That brings me back. I'll show you how old I am. When I bought this book, I keep saying that. Okay, I was 11. When I had this book purchased for me by a parent, I'd actually been going to school with a kid whose last name was Haynes. Same spelling, too. The suburb where I grew up was mostly populated with the children or grandchildren of immigrants, so surnames like Haynes or Barkley or Dyson were a rarity. This was, in 1985, that rarest example of a Doctor Who story taking place in my world. Of course, that was 37 years ago, and I have no idea where that Haynes kid is today. Well, actually I do. He's on Facebook, posting awful right-wing memes, and we have like 20 mutuals, but what was I trying to say again? Never mind. Chapter 12, Resistance in the Radiation Room, is a furious, tense bit of business, with expertly described action. I recall being disappointed when I first saw the Telesnap recon of this for the late 1990s VHS release of 10th Planet. I've got every faith that Derek Martinus would have directed the heck out of it if we had the surviving Episode 4 on video, but I suspect the book version is even better. Quote, like a forest giant, the dead Cyber Leader slowly toppled forward, crashing onto Jarl's body. Think about how visual that line is, complete with a simile. On TV, where dead Cybermen in the 1960s were generally floppy, empty costumes, not the same in the book. When Haynes dies, his eyes stare upwards in death. A lot of other novelizations outside of the Doctor Who world are either written tongue-in-cheek or pitched at much younger kids. Davis is writing this thing like a feature film. Barclay gets a story arc in the book, too. He assumes command of the base in Chapter 13 and, quote, spoke with a new sense of authority and purpose. And the third and final Cyberman incursion into the Snowcat base, a character named Shav who gets a single line on TV, is much better in Chapter 13, getting more poetic dialogue. We have been patient with you, but this will not continue. And going all taking of Pelham 123 on the humans, threatening to kill everyone in order, starting with Ben. And as for the destruction of Mondas, quote, as they watched, huge fissures and cracks appeared. Trickles of white-hot lava were running from the cracks and down the face of the planet. The whole surface seemed to be bubbling and erupting, creating thousands of minor volcanoes. The land masses began distorting and running together. The glare from the planet was now so intense that they had to shield their eyes to look at it. The Cybermen's death is much more vivid too, as their corpses ooze gray, evil-looking foam. Now, I'm not sure how foam exactly becomes evil-looking, but I'll give Davis that one excess. Ross and I talked about the regeneration scene earlier. I was super excited to read this in print in 1985. More so than I probably was when I finally got to see the surviving regeneration scene on VHS in the 90s. Again, though, I prefer Hartnell's TV line, it's far from being all over, to the book where he says it isn't over. It's not over by a long way. More gorgeous visuals, though. The drifting snow had completely covered the dead bodies of the Cybermen. The polar scene had an incredible purity and innocence, like a dream landscape. On TV, nobody really knew on October 29, 1966, what Patrick Troughton was going to be like as the Doctor. Possibly not even Troughton himself at that point. It's literally months before his character moved past the crutches of the funny hats and the wacky accents and the comic disguises, before Troughton found the essence of the second Doctor within. Davis pays some tribute to the early idea, with the now unfortunate description of the new Doctor having a swarthy, almost gypsy appearance. That is a quickly abandoned take on the role that never actually came to fruition. But otherwise, writing a decade after all that, Davis nails Troughton from the get-go. His eyes were blue-green like the sea. Although friendly, they had an elusive mocking quality. The early second Doctor lines are written so crisply that you can hear Troughton saying them, even though he never did on TV. Now that's some perfect writing. Next time, we are still in February 1976, but we jump ahead 2 Doctors to discuss Doctor Who and the Dinosaur Invasion, the novelization of the Season 11 classic with the less-than-classic special effects. I'll be joined by a very good friend for that recording. Thank you for joining me on another episode of the Doctor Who Literature Podcast. I'm Jason, your host and editor and producer. Special thanks to my special guest, Ross from Gallifrey's Most Wanted. This podcast is brought to you by Anchor and can also be found on Spotify and Google Podcasts. You can find me on Twitter at Doctor Who Novels, that's Dr. Who Novels, and you can also find me on the Trap One podcast from time to time. I write about Doctor Who on Twitter using the hashtag Doctor Who Pilgrimage, that's Dr. Who Pilgrimage. Please drop me a line with your comments, questions, and suggestions. Next time we'll be discussing another novelization, and we'll again be joined by a very special guest. Thank you for listening, and whatever you do, keep turning the pages.